After studying this module, you should be able to understand the techniques of person-centered therapy, know about the client's experience in therapy, analyze the assessment techniques used by Carl Rogers, identify the application of person-centered therapy, and evaluate the strengths and limitations of person-centered therapy. The person-centered therapy is a non-directive approach to treatment. The client makes an excursion through their problems and the therapist keeps them company. Research has shown that clients can experience changes when involved in person-centered therapy. When the client feels unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy, only then the client experiences this and there is any initiation of therapeutic change. In a fully supportive environment, the client can begin to understand their problems and work towards solving them and changing the directions of their lives. It has been discussed that person-centered therapy can be stressful for the therapist. The therapist has to have self-acceptance, self-trust, and be comfortable with their own feelings. They must work at continuing to grow as a person and be prepared to broaden their own life experiences. The therapist must feel secure within themselves and capable of supporting the client. The therapist must suppress their own prejudices and values in person-centered therapy.
Techniques used in person-centered therapy. Rogers' most important impact to the field of counseling is the belief that in a therapeutic relationship, there are no conventional techniques involved. For Roger, the personality of the counselor in therapeutic relationship played a significant role. Techniques do not operate separately from the personality of the counselor. His emphasis was that the counselors should evolve as persons and not just acquire a number of therapeutic strategies. Thus, Rogers was committed to the task of demystifying therapeutic relationship so that they could be studied and experienced as vibrant interactions between real human beings rather than as private and mysterious treatment processes between distressed patients and omniscient professionals. Even though person centered therapists abide to establish rudimentary beliefs about human nature and the desirable characteristics of helping relationships, they may be at variance extensively in their therapeutic styles and the manner in which they apply these set of principles in their counseling practice. In contemporary times, the counselors have been permitted more freedom in contributing more dynamically in the relationship. They use a comprehensive range of methods. There is a good deal of variety in personal style. The present inclination is to allow counselor trainees to come up with their own style rather than constraining them to follow the style of Carl Rogers. Rogers' technique of reflection of feelings is considered one of the important techniques even today. Nevertheless, some of the techniques used by person-centered therapists in counseling relationship are as follows. Reflection of feelings, referred to as active listening, is one of the most used technique in person-centered approach. In applying this technique, the counselor carefully attends to the client's verbal and non-verbal messages, interprets the surface and underlying meanings, and then formulates a response that establishes a deep level appreciation or understanding of the client's feeling. Throughout the course of process, the counselor will be following the position of empathetic understanding. In actuality, reflection of feeling is simple to pick up but the most challenging techniques to practice in counseling process. This technique has quite a lot of advantages which are It promotes an open and authentic helping relationship between the therapist and the client. At its most elementary level, the counselor listens carefully to the fundamental feelings that are expressed and communicated back what is perceived, even if the reflection of the feeling is erroneous, and takes no notice of the client's actual messages. It still reassures further self exploration. It helps the client to feel free from worry that he is deeply understood and accepted for his feelings. It clarifies the client's feelings so that the condition may be looked at in more of objective manner. It arranges for an opportunity for emotional catharsis, providing relief from pent up tension and pressures. It facilitates the client to move from shallow concerns to deeper, more substantial or significant problems. Attending and listening. The second technique, which is used for effective reflection, is that one must have attending and listening skills. In fact, the physical and psychological attending to people who seek help is the most essential base for all therapeutic interventions. It is through posture, body position, facial expression, eye contact, head nods, hand movements, gestures, and verbal encouragements that the counselor communicates strong concern in everything a client articulates and feels. It is concluded that through such active attending that the counselor can also observe the non-verbal cues manifested in the client's behavior. A quivering lip, clenched fist, knotted brow provide signal about what the client is experiencing. Effective listening is also one of the attending skills. It is useful if the following hints are kept in mind when one is listening to the client for better and effective understanding of client's feelings. Have a reason for listening. One should know what to listen for and how it is going to be useful in exploring and understanding the client. Be non judgmental. The therapist should be non judgmental. The therapist should allow the client's message to penetrate without making any decisions about it. Resist distractions. The therapist should keep in mind that there should be no distractions, both internal and external, when one's attention is focused on the client. Wait to respond. The therapist should take time in responding to client. He should avoid rushed and phony responses to client's statement. One should take time to make deep and meaningful responses. Reflect content. The therapist should say back to clients what is perceived from their communicates understanding and provides check on correctness of your perceptions. Look for themes. The therapist should focus on the content that is relevant and meaningful. Recognize themes that help in the understanding of client's perception. Some of the other techniques which are used by the counselor that helps in promoting verbal responses from the client are active listening. Proceeds when one listens for meaning. The listener says very little but expresses much attentiveness. The listener only speaks to catch out if a statement has been properly perceived and understood. Passive listening occurs when one recognizes clients' messages by using verbal and non-verbal gestures. Parroting takes place when the therapist repeats the client's words to point out curiosity and exhibit accuracy of listening. Paraphrasing refers to the restatement of the client's statement to clarify or to focus client's attention. Clarification deals with confirming the accurateness of the client's message or reassuring them with further expansion of an idea. Questions are avoided by the therapist wherever it is possible. Reflection of feelings, as discussed earlier in detail, refers to focusing on affect to promote catharsis and self expression. Summarizing is another technique which is used by person centered therapists, in which he puts clients' ideas together to promote insight and identify significant themes and draw closure to the therapy. Since 1980, person centered counselors have tried a number of other procedures or techniques for working with the clients, such as limited self disclosure of feelings, thoughts, and values. However, it has been observed that clients grow by experiencing themselves and others in the relationships. The client's experience in therapy. When clients come to therapy, they are usually in a state of distress, feeling powerless, indecisive, or helpless. The therapeutic relationship offers them an opportunity to express the fears, anxieties, guilt, anger, or shame that they have not been able to accept with themselves. When the six necessary and sufficient conditions are met, they will be better able to accept themselves and others and to express themselves creatively. In the process of therapy, they will experience themselves in the new ways by taking responsibility for themselves and their process of self exploration, leading to a deeper understanding of self and to positive change. The following conditions are experienced by the client in therapy. Experiencing responsibility in therapy, clients learn that they are responsible for themselves both in the therapeutic relationship and more broadly. Although clients may at first be frustrated or puzzled by the therapist's emphasis on the client's experience, person centered therapists believe that clients soon come to accept and welcome this. Experiencing the therapist. Gradually, the client come to appreciate the empathy and unconditional positive regard of therapist. There is a feeling of being cared for and being fully accepted. The experience of being truly cared for assists clients in caring more deeply for themselves and for others. Experiencing the process of exploration. The caring and empathy of the therapist allow the client to explore fearful or anxiety producing experiences. These attitudes allow for the client to change and develop his personal construct by exploring feelings that are deeply felt rather than feelings that should be sensed. The client can experience a feeling of total honesty and self awareness. Contradictions within oneself can be explored, such as I love my daughter, but her violent anger towards me makes me really question this. Experiencing the self. With self exploration, individual comes to realize that his deepest unconscious layers of personality are moving forward and in realistic manner. Experiencing the change. In experiencing the change, there is a sense of progress even when the client may still feel confused. Clients bring up some issues, discuss them, and sense them, and move on to other problems or challenges he is having and faces them. The therapist's warm presence allows the client to deal with issues that may be upsetting and difficult. Assessment techniques used in therapy. In the initial days of counseling, Roger recommended not to use tests or to take complete case history at the beginning of the counseling session. If a counseling relationship began with a battery of tests at the inception of counseling, he believed clients could get the impression that the counselor would be providing the solution to their problems. But Roger admitted that tests might be used if they were used for conclusion of counseling. However, today it is believed that how could you ever expect to assist someone if you haven't get a clear picture about what exactly is going on. Assessment, testing and the subsequent diagnostic process allow both clients and counselor to proceed in an organized way. From the person centered perspective, the preeminent source of awareness about the client is the individual client. Some clients may request certain tests are part of the counseling process. It is essential for the counselor to follow the client's call in the therapeutic process. Therefore, the important question is not whether to incorporate assessment into therapeutic practice, but how to involve clients as fully as possible in their assessment process. Research on therapy. As Rogers sought after to validate his therapeutic approach with empirical evidence, he pronounced his constructs as specifically as possible. He used the Q-sort technique to allow clients to describe themselves and could actually see movement of the real self and ideal self into greater congruence. Today, with the emphasis on brief therapy, there is amplified expectation that the therapist state specific goals for the client. In general, there are some commonly desired outcomes for clients. The person should be able to function more satisfactorily in his work or family, and troubling symptoms should be reduced. Humanistic therapists stress, however, that progress should be determined by the client's experience, not so much by others. The Q-sort, developed by W. Stephenson and was far and wide used by Carl Rogers, measures congruence between the ideal and true self. The client is asked to sort these cards in order from most like me to least like me under the heading Self and Ideal. From this, Rogers and Diamond formed a numerical discrepancy between real and ideal self. By administering the Q sort at different times during therapy, the effectiveness of the therapy sessions was assessed. It was done to combat critics who note the humanistic approach was unscientific in nature as could not be replicated. It was stated in 2005 by Christian Baum and Jordan that publications on Rogers and the client centered or personal centered approach have increased considerably since Rogers' death in 1987. Recent research on psychotherapy has validated the significance of empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence, which are the central features of Rogers' approach for effective therapy. Criticism of Rogers centered therapy was that it was reasonably effective with less severe disorders but ineffective with severe mental disorders. This criticism, while correct, is misleading in that while Rogers did numerous studies with patients with schizophrenia, he at no time claimed that his therapy was effective with those with serious mental disorders. Rogers found in his work that the more disturbed the client, the less he was able to perceive the values of genuineness, empathy, or unconditional positive regard, which are necessary for Rogers' therapy to be effective. Research on the efficacy of the client centered therapy has been criticized for lacking some essential necessities of the scientific approach, example, inapt control groups, and also lacking scientific rigor. Rogers himself thought in the importance of conducting research on psychotherapy processes and outcomes, and that actual research findings should take preference over the theoretical background. Application of person-centered therapy. Person-centered approach can be applied to various areas of our life, some of which are humanistic education, is similar to Rogers' ideas about therapy. This form of education is dedicated on what the student wishes to get from the educational experience, not what the educator expects him to achieve. There is no experience of fear of failure or guilt in this form of education. Fear destabilizes creative exploration of learning. So the learner must decide for himself what is crucial to be learned for the experience to have been successful. The teacher wants to nurture the student's interest and means of learning. Each person is responsible for his learning experience. So the teacher becomes a facilitator of learning using collaborative experiences, not simply book learning, for the emotional engagement of the learner. Marriage and relationships. Rogers had expected that there would be changes in the marriage relationships of today. With anticipations of partners to be equal, rejecting social roles, mutual trust, and tolerance of individual differences in establishing relationships. Satellite relationships refers to those that are outside relationships that offer support to one of the married partners. Understandably, such relationships can become sexual, intimidating the original bond. But humanists would say the individual must decide the value of these relationships and what is vital to the person in maintaining them. Even friendships should be regarded by congruence, unconditional acceptance, and empathy. People who have friendships like this generally score higher on measures of adjustment and self esteem. Social welfare programs. Rogers believed that support is not simply handed out, but clients are stimulated to become self sustaining and empowered. Then their dependence on welfare will decline. Organizations. Rogers' approach can be applied in establishing more effective management teams and encouraging creative problem solving and decision making from many members of the firm. Political conflict, war, and peace. Ultimately, Rogers desired to see psychological principles used in coming up with answers to world conflicts, diminishment of threat of nuclear power, support for the poor, and creating harmony and peace. Encounter groups were established as a growth enhancing technique in which a group of people honestly express themselves to a group and agree to take the group's wisdom, support, and mild confrontations. These are powerful engines of change, but not every client can participate. People must have developed some inner strength to handle the group's presence and to open themselves up in front of others in an honest manner. There are experiences intended to increase interpersonal functioning as well as motivate personal growth in an individual and group. Facilitator is referred to as the leader of the group, but normally the leader does not direct the group in a well thought out way. Commonly, the facilitator assists in keeping the atmosphere safe and helps members to express themselves in ways that do not harm others. In a truly unstructured group, a leader will appear and other members will accept the leader or challenge him. People will project their issues onto one another, and if the group is truly sensitive, these transferences can be used to explore inner dynamics. Evaluation of person centered therapy. Advantages. This approach is effective in a number of settings. Person centered counseling helps an individual to improve psychological adjustment, learning, and teach him to tolerate frustration. It is appropriate in treating mild to moderate anxiety states, adjustment disorders, and interpersonal relations. The person centered approach to counseling is applicable to a wide range of human problems, including situational changes, labor management relationships, career decision making, leadership development, and international diplomacy. Many theorists reported that the person centered approach can be effective in promoting multicultural counseling. One of the major strengths of humanistic psychology is that it emphasizes the role of the individual. This school of psychology gives people more credit in controlling and determining their state of mental health. The person centered approach may be helpful in working with clients who has experienced tragedies since it has allowed them to struggle through emotions and actually becomes less affected in time by fully realizing feelings related to the tragedies. The uncomplicated nature of his approach that the client's self esteem must be nurtured and rebuilt, and that the absence of this will leave any techniques ungrounded has been of much value. Rogers' theory helps remove some of the stigma attached to therapy and made it more acceptable for normal healthy individuals to explore their abilities and potential through therapy. It also takes environmental influences into account. Rather than focusing solely on our internal thoughts and desires, humanistic psychology also credits the environment's influence on our experiences. Limitations. Many theorists feel that Carl Rogers' approach may be too simplistic and optimistic for clients in crisis who need more structure and direction. His theory was criticized because he uses very few ideas and assumptions, and thus his theory was criticized for being restricted in scope and using reductionist method. It has been reported by many that this approach is influenced by the client's traits. It's effective for those individuals who are bright, insightful, and hardworking, and then yields best results. It has limited applicability and is rarely employed with the severe disabled or young children. Rogers' theory was criticized as some of his concepts could not be tested, like measuring key concepts such as empathy, genuineness, unconditional positive regard. Major criticism of his approach was that observations are unverifiable. There is no accurate way to measure or quantify these qualities. The approach ignores the unconscious denial theories and innately generated sexual and aggressive drives. Many critics think it is overly optimistic. The approach deals only with surface issues and does not challenge the client to explore deeper areas because person centered counseling in short term. It may not make a permanent impact on person.
A summary of this module is as follows. Rogers' most important impact to the field of counseling is the belief that in a therapeutic relationship there are no conventional techniques involved. For Rogers, the personality of the counselor in the therapeutic relationship played a significant role. Rogers' technique of reflection of feelings is considered one of the most important techniques. Reflection of feelings, referred to as active listening, is one of the most used techniques in person centered approach. Some of the techniques which are used by the counselor that helps in promoting verbal responses from the client are active listening, passive listening, paraphrasing, parroting, clarifying and summarizing. In the process of therapy, clients will experience themselves in the new ways by taking responsibility for themselves and their process of self-exploration, leading to a deeper understanding of self and to positive change. Carl Rogers gave us some new methods of assessment like Q-sort and using audio and video recordings for collection of data. The person-centered approach to counseling is applicable to a wide range of human problems including situational changes, labor management relationships, career decision making, leadership development and international diplomacy. Rogers' theory was criticized as some of his concepts could not be tested, like measuring key concepts such as empathy, genuineness, unconditional positive regard. Major criticism of his approach was that observations are unverifiable. There is no accurate way to measure or quantify these qualities. Though some of Rogers' critics felt that his theory was superficial, overly optimistic, and underestimated the capacity for human evil, the uncomplicatedness of his approach and his belief in the strength and power of human potential is carried on in humanistic and transpersonal fields even today.